Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, may we glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Yesterday, immediately after question period, the opposition House Leader raised a point of order pursuant to Rule 52, requesting the tabling of documents referenced by the Deputy Premier in relation to policy development documents of previous legislative secretaries. I've reviewed the transcript on page 4348 of Hansard. The Deputy Premier, in his comments, referred to recommendations made by the previous legislative secretaries, but did not quote from specific documents. Therefore, the point of order is not well taken, and the Minister is not required to table any documents. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Provincial Secretary.
With leave for extended introduction, please.
Provincial Secretary is asked for leave for extended introductions. Leave granted. Agreed. Recognize the Provincial Secretary.
To you and through you and all members of the Assembly, seated in your gallery is a very special guest. It is my pleasure to introduce to the Legislative Assembly today Mr. Anil Bora Anand, Consul General of the Republic of Turkey in Vancouver, British Columbia. Accompanying him is Mr. Omar Al-Khabib, Honorary Consul General of the Republic of Turkey for Saskatchewan. Also present is Melinda Carter, Senior International Officer, and Mr. Ferhat Charuk, Vice Consul, Consul General of the Republic of Turkey in Vancouver. This is the first Turkish Consul General visit by Mr. Anand to Western Canada. He is responsible for the provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, as well as the Northwest Territories and Yukon. Before taking on his new role as Turkish Consul General, Mr. Anand held a number of positions for Turkey's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has lived in many places around the world, including the United Kingdom, the United States, and Syria. We are happy Mr. Anand is now adding Canada to his list of homes away from home, and hope he has a chance to take in all the amazing experiences and sights of our country in Canada and Saskatchewan. While in Saskatoon, Mr. Anand met with the Mayor and representatives of Saskatchewan Polytechnique, visited the University of Saskatchewan, and met with Turkish citizens. In Regina, he has met with a number of elected officials and the Lieutenant Governor, and has visited AGT Food and Ingredients. He will also meet with the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership and more elected officials this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, Turkey is an important trading partner for Saskatchewan with agri-foods such as lentils, chickpeas, and durum wheat, representing 97% of our exports. We also imported over 10 million in goods from Turkey in 2017. Saskatchewan has welcomed 113 Turkish citizens as permanent residents between 2007 and 2016. Turkey remains an important partner for our province, and we are honored to have the Consul General with us today to discuss our business and trade ties and to explore the opportunities for collaboration. Mr. Speaker, I have learned the Turkish word for welcome translates to your arrival is wonderful. With this in mind, I ask that all members of the Assembly please join me in welcoming Mr. Anand to Saskatchewan's legislature.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the member opposite in saying marhaba and hoş geldiniz to the visitors, Mr. Bora Anand, Mr. Al-Khatib, and Mr. Shatuk. Thank you very much for your visit today as Consul General for Western Canada. It's great to have you visit our province and our legislature. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us and for furthering this important trading relationship and growing friendship, and I ask the members to join me in adding our welcome to these visitors. Thanks so much.
Recognize the member for Bigger Sask Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all the members of the legislature, I'd like to introduce a group of 34 students, grade 5 students from Langham Elementary School seated in the West Gallery. give us a wave, please. They're accompanied by teachers Ben Dunville, Lisa Lester, Laura P. Fontaine, and chaperone Susan Thompson, Tim Prosser, Fiona Lang, Noel Hubbard, and Dorian Clapper. I look forward to having a photo with you later and a meeting together. I hope to get real interesting questions from you. And so please join me in welcoming this group of grade 5 students from Langham.
As a member for Cutknife, Turtleford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce 9 grade 7, 8, and 9 students from the Wheatland Christian School in Neilburg, seated in the West Gallery. They're accompanied by their teacher, Christy Dojuik, their chaperones, Wes and Eileen Schmidt, Evan and Bonita Leckman, Kendall Duick, Angela Toes, Lauren and Sonia Weeb. I will be meeting with them after question period for a picture and words of wisdom, and I look forward to that. Would you please welcome them to their assembly?
And as a member for Regina Rosemont.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I ask for extended leave for introduction.
Members ask for leave for extended introduction. Leave granted. Recognize the member.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seated in the West Gallery here today, it's an honor to have some friends and some community leaders from Moose Jaw with us here today. Jody Oakes is with us here. She's a business leader in Moose Jaw, well established in multiple businesses within the community. She's also someone that gives back to her community as a tireless volunteer, as somebody who's worked as a leader to establish mental health and addictions counseling and a community center within the region. She's somebody that gives back in many, many ways. She's here today with her husband, Rick Oakes, who's here as well. Rick is a leader in agriculture. He works with cattle operations all across the prairies. He's also a hockey scout in both the SJ and the Dub. He played for both the Millionaires and the Huskies, and is an agriculture grad and all-around good guy. And I'm really pleased to welcome Kaylee Olson here today, a grade 11 student who's here today from Central Collegiate, an incredible powwow dancer, a fancy shawl dancer, and a real community leader. I'll be identifying some of her leadership in a member statement very shortly, but I ask all members to welcome these leaders from Moose Jaw to their assembly here today.
Here, here. And I have a group, I got a student group to introduce today as well. So joining us today in my gallery are 59 grade 7 and 8 students from St. Gregory School in Regina. They're accompanied by teachers Mr. Brett Matlock and Miss Diana Shuba. I had the opportunity to meet with them in my office earlier today. 59 of them jammed in there for a photo opportunity. You heated up the office, it was awesome. Mr. Matlock volunteers with the Understand Us, a Saskatchewan-based mental health foundation that was founded and is chaired by Mr. Jim Demaray, a University of Regina graduate. Understand Us is a volunteer initiative that combats the stigma of mental health. They create a new awareness campaign each year to focus on mental health and to educate youth through the use of their classroom web shop and website resources. The Understand Us initiatives are meant to spark a conversation and promote a better understanding of mental health. Some of Understand Us initiatives are Take a Minute, Choose You, Vulnerable is Beautiful, Share Your Recipe, and Letters to No One. This year, Mr. Matlock worked with the grade 7 and 8 students from St. Gregory, and they created the Me to You movement to celebrate individuals' vulnerabilities to support them in their growth. Please join me in welcoming the teachers and students from St. Gregory School to their legislature. Presenting petitions. Recognize the member for Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to present a petition from the citizens who are opposed to the federal government decisions to impose a carbon tax on the province of Saskatchewan. I do like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows. Respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To cause the government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing carbon tax on the province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by citizens of Moose Jaw, Regina, Fort Qu'Appelle. I do so present.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to get big money out of Saskatchewan politics. And the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan want to bring to our attention the following. You know, that Saskatchewan's outdated Election Act allows corporations, unions, and individuals, even those outside the province, to make unlimited donations to our province's political parties. And that the people of Saskatchewan deserve to live in a fair province where all voices are equal and money can't influence politics. And Mr. Speaker, we know that Brad Wall, the Sask Party leader, was the only premier in the country who collected a special cash bonus paid for by taxpayer-funded subsidies and portions of the millions of dollars they collected from corporations and big money donors, including some from outside this province. And that over the past 10 years, Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party has collected $12.61 million in corporate donations, and of that, $2.87 million came from companies outside this province of Saskatchewan. You know, Saskatchewan politics should belong to Saskatchewan people. And the federal government and the province of Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, British Columbia have moved to limit this influence and level the playing field by banning corporate and union donations to political parties. I'd like to read the prayer, Mr. Speaker. We in the prayer that reads as follows: respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party to overhaul Saskatchewan campaign finance laws, to end out-of-province donations, to put a ban on donations from corporations and unions, and to put a donation limit on individual donations. Mr. Speaker, the people signing this petition come from the city of Regina. I do so present.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the Sask Party government to restore the rental housing supplement. These citizens wish to bring to your attention that the rental housing supplement helps people living with disabilities and low-income families pay their rent. That the Sask Party's elimination of the rental housing supplement hurts low-income families and people with disabilities, and that rents remain unaffordably high for many since the cost of living has increased significantly since the last decade, while social services benefits have remained unchanged. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to immediately restore the Saskatchewan rental housing supplement. Mr. Speaker, I have some pages and pages of this that are signed by individuals from Saskatoon today. I do so present.
I recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for critical workplace supports for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has the very dubious distinction of having the highest rates of domestic violence amongst all of the provinces in Canada, and we know that we should all do everything we can to protect survivors of interpersonal violence. Mr. Speaker, for many who experience this domestic violence, that violence will follow them to their workplace, which is why the signatories to this petition are calling for 5 days of paid leave and up to 17 weeks of unpaid leave be made available to workers who are survivors of domestic violence, and that critical workplace supports made available to survivors of domestic violence be also made available to workers living with PTSD as a result of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, this is what those who are on the front line of this crisis are calling for, the YWCA of Regina and PATHS, to name a few organizations. They recognize the importance of ensuring that those who are fleeing interpersonal violence are able to maintain their employment while they're going through that transition. It's very important for their sense of security and stability, Mr. Speaker. This is what we're calling for in our private member's bill, Bill number 609. It's the 4th time we've tabled these provisions in this House in the last 2 years. It's time for the Sask Party to finally do the right thing, step up to the plate and pass these provisions. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call upon the Sask Party to pass legislation to ensure critical supports in the workplace, including reasonable accommodation and paid and unpaid leave for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, I have pages of this petition to submit today. The signatories for today's petition come from Saskatoon, Regina, and Emerald Park. I do so present.
I recognize the member for Athabasca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to stand in my place to present a petition around the drug Orkambi. Whereas Orkambi is the first drug to treat the basic defect in the largest population of Canadians living with cystic fibrosis. Mr. Speaker, Orkambi can slow disease progression, allowing patients to live longer, healthier lives. We in the prayer reads as follows: we respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan urge the Ministry of Health to negotiate a fair price for Orkambi and to make it available to the Saskatchewan Drug Plan for those who meet the conditions set out by Health Canada and the clinical criteria established by the Canadian CF clinicians. Now, Mr. Speaker, as we present this petition day after day in this Assembly, from town after town and city after city and page after page, the page I wish to present today are all people that have signed from Maidstone, Saskatchewan, and I so present.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. Recognize the member for Regina Wall-Shakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House and inform members about a new rental housing project that's underway here in Regina. Once completed, 6 families will be able to live in safety and comfort as they work towards building a brighter future. Silver Sage Holdings is taking a leadership role by recognizing a need for this type of housing and acting on it. Our government values the work that they do each day to support people in greatest housing need. Mr. Speaker, this project is not just about the construction of homes, it's also about partners working together to make a difference in the lives of Saskatchewan people. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation, along with the federal housing partner, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Jointly, they're contributing more than $900,000 under the Canada-Saskatchewan Investment in Affordable Housing Agreement to support this worthwhile initiative. Since November 2007, 296 affordable renting units for households with complex needs or those at risk of homelessness have been completed in Regina. This includes the Silver Sage 6-unit family project and an additional 35 rental units which are currently under construction. This project supports our government's housing strategy, poverty reduction strategy, disability strategy, and mental health addictions plan by developing homes for those considered hard to home. It is an honor for us to work with various partners to carry out this commitment throughout the communities in our province. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Movement taking place in Moose Jaw, and it's being led in part by an incredible young woman who inspires me and gives me hope for the future, Kaylee Olson, who's joined us here today in the legislature.
Hear, hear.
On May 24th, 1929, the space that's currently referred to as the Moose Jaw Wild Animal Park was officially named Sitting Bull Park. 88 years later, to the day, Kaylee and her friends are working to restore rich Indigenous history that has fallen victim to time and colonization. The valley in which the city of Moose Jaw now sits served as a hub that connected trails that stretched far into what are now parts of the United States and Canada. Many artifacts and burials are left over from those times. Mr. Speaker, this is about protecting sacred land, which has not been fully studied or catalogued, and telling its story. This is exactly what Kaylee Olson and her friends are attempting to do, and it's an important part of reconciliation. They want to see the site officially recognized as a heritage site. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, this issue has been brought forward by citizens in the past. I urge the government to work with these young, incredible leaders, Indigenous peoples and leaders and community members to properly protect the land and to tell the rich history of the valley. And I ask all members to join with me in recognizing Kaylee and her friends and community leaders for their leadership on this very important file. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Regina Rochdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand in the House today to acknowledge a successful donation drive held here at the Legislative Buildings last week. I was honored to host a Dress for Success shoe drive, and I'm happy to report that over 100 pairs of shoes were donated. Mr. Speaker, Dress for Success Regina is an affiliate of the global organization that envisions a world where women do not live in poverty. Last week, Dress for Success reached out because the organization here in Regina was short of shoes. Now, this organization has a vision of a world where all women are financially independent, are treated with dignity and respect, and are directly impacted their lives and their families' lives. Dress for Success strives to accomplish this by by providing women professional attire, employment counseling, and interview help. Mr. Speaker, Dress for Success is about more than outfits, but it's about equipping women to break the poverty cycle. On behalf of everyone in this Assembly, I'd like to thank Dress for Success Regina and those involved in this successful donation drive last week. I encourage all members and people across the entire province to continue to donate to business attire to Dress for Success. Mr. Speaker, when women succeed, we all succeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Cumberland.
Here, here. Family and friends of Happy Charles organized a walk to help bring awareness for their missing loved one. Here, here. The walk from Prince Albert to La Ronge started Sunday, May 6th. The idea for the walk came from Happy Charles' daughter, Marcia Bird, who was inspired while she was attending a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Youth Conference in Prince Albert. The family and friends finished the 246-kilometer walk on Sunday, May 13th, on Mother's Day, at the Urban Reserve in La Ronge, where they were greeted by many loved ones and community members. Happy Charles' mother, Regina Poitres, said they walked 30 kilometers every day before stopping to camp beside the road and to do a nightly round dance. The walk was meant to raise awareness that Charles is still missing and to bring healing to her family. Regina has a strong advocate for her missing daughter. Regina has been a strong advocate for her missing daughter and feels more needs to be done to help families of missing and murdered Indigenous women. With more supports to assist families of missing persons and more resources for searches. Charles was last seen in Prince Albert near PACI High School, April 3rd, 2017, and her family has been searching for her ever since. I ask all members to join me in recognizing everyone who took part in this walk or donated, and in keeping Happy Charles' family in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On May 12th, the Pharmacy Association of Saskatchewan Awards were held here in Regina. The award ceremony is an annual celebration of exceptional service by pharmacists in our province and recognized many members of the association who are providing exemplary care to their patients and communities. This year, there were 7 categories recognized, which include 17 individuals being recognized in areas such as Professional Service Awards, Award of Merits, and Pharmacist of the Year. For the first time this year, the Lifetime Achievement Award was handed out. Rod Amaya was the inaugural recipient, as he was recognized for his leadership and professionalism in his career, and for his long-term service in pharmacy here in Saskatchewan. The award ceremony was one of the many events held in Regina this weekend by the Pharmacy Association, as it was a part of their annual conference. It was a chance for the member of the association to come together to network, discuss important topics within the profession, as well as celebrate their colleagues on their success and impact they have had on their communities. Mr. Speaker, I now ask all the members, please join me in congratulating the winners of Pharmacy of Saskatchewan's annual award ceremony, as well as thanks to many volunteers and association members for putting on this great event. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Carrot River Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month, I had the pleasure of attending 2 events supporting our volunteer first responders in my constituency. On the weekend of May 12th, a barbecue was held in Nipawin to show appreciation to the volunteer first responders, firefighters, medical personnel, and anyone who assisted those impacted by the Humboldt Broncos bus accident. The barbecue attendees included the member from Melfort, our member from Parliament, Randy Hobach, and the Mayor of Nipawin, Rennie Harper. This past weekend, the second barbecue was held in Tisdale, again to support the volunteer first responders. This event was attended by our Premier, the member from Humboldt, Tisdale Mayor Al Jellicoe, and again by myself and MP Randy Hobach. Mr. Speaker, the tremendous support shown at both of these events indicates a level of appreciation and gratitude we have for our volunteer first responders. Saskatchewan is known for having the best volunteers in all of Canada. These first responders and firefighters are integral to the safety and well-being of those who live in the rural areas of our province. Their dedication to their work through continuous training and education provides a sense of safety that rural residents can rely on. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to commend both communities of Dipwin and Tisdale for hosting these barbecues to acknowledge the important work of those who volunteer their lives, ensuring the people of this province are safe and well taken care of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Kenora-Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the residents of Fort Pelly, Livingston area were devastated by the news that a local museum had burnt down. For decades, local residents had contributed to the historic displays and worked at the museum, which housed artifacts of the colonial and the pioneer era of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the community gathered and a new board of directors committed to rebuilding. The community faced numerous obstacles, including a lack of funding due to the building not being insured, and recovery issues as the old site had asbestos, so nothing recovered in the rubble could be used. Fundraising efforts began with the goal of attaining a new building to house the new museum. Community members and local businesses contributed generously to the fundraising events, and volunteered committees were formed. Mr. Speaker, the community eventually raised enough money to purchase the former RCMP barracks building. The board worked with First Nations population and 3 local reserves, giving the museum a new voice to their history. Despite having lost many historic artifacts, the museum has done well to provide most recent history displays. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in commending the Fort Pelly Livingston area on their hard work and community spirit. Congratulations to the new museum, which was celebrated the grand opening this past Saturday, which I attended. Thank you.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems like each passing day in this Assembly, we learn more about the millions lost at the GTH. As we learn more about the shady deals at the GTH, we also learn more about the cost to Saskatchewan people. You know, it wasn't that long ago, during the Sask Party leadership race, the members of this cabinet were speaking out about the need for more transparency. Back then, the Minister of Central Services, for example, had quite a lot to say. On his leadership campaign website, he said, and I quote, "I believe that we owe the people of Saskatchewan answers to questions around the global transportation hub. Therefore, I would not rule out an inquiry after the police investigation. Of course, this decision lies with the new Premier, Cabinet, and caucus." End quote. The minister wouldn't rule out an inquiry when he was running to lead the Sask Party. Would he rule one out today? Or does he support a judicial inquiry to get to the bottom of the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, we thank the member opposite for the question. The process is ongoing. I don't think anybody on this side of the House wants to make a comment on anything while the matter is still being under review by the Manitoba prosecutions to try and say yes or no to a specific course of action that may take place afterwards. It would be inappropriate for anybody on this side of the House, and I think should be inappropriate on that side of the House to try and make any comments, anything would make any particular inferences, or would interfere with the processes that are taking place in Manitoba. We support the work that the RCMP has done. We support the work that was done by the provincial auditor, and we'll look carefully what the outcome of that is, and we won't be commenting on it until after that time.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there's a great deal of work to be done to understand the full scope of the problems at the GTH, work that we could start now. Now, during his truncated run for leadership, the Minister for Trade and Export Development made some pretty clear statements to that same effect about the GTH. Besides promising to sell the whole thing off and saying he would have fired Bill Boyd because of how bad things were at the time, he also rolled out a 10-point transparency and accountability plan to make things more clear in government. You know, it's hard to imagine how things could be any more transparent and accountable than having a judicial inquiry into the GTH. Does the Minister for Trade and Export Development support a judicial inquiry, or does he still maintain, as he said so many times before seeking the leadership, that there was no wrongdoing, no conflict of interest?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial auditor reviewed the matter. The provincial auditor has people on her staff that were forensic auditors and indicated that there were no red flags. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we've indicated and will continue to take the position that as long as the matter is under active investigation by the RCMP or under review by the prosecutions, it would be inappropriate for us to talk about any future steps after that. Work was done before that. I would like to say to the members opposite that we have 1,871 acres at the Global Transportation Hub. Common use roads, etc., took out 405 acres. CP and Loblaws, 413 acres. We've also sold an additional 339, which means we have left for sale 714 acres. And would love to have the support of the opposition in marketing that, and would love to hear a positive endorsement from them that would bring jobs and economic activity into Regina.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we'd love to give a ringing endorsement to the GTH and see it succeed. However, with the cloud of scandal that hangs over it, it's so hard for that to proceed, so hard for the public to get their minds around that very idea. You know, Mr. Speaker, there's another member of the Cabinet who had a lot to say about the GTH during the Sask Party leadership race, and she's now the Minister of Advanced Education. Now, she wasn't shy about her statement. In fact, in a statement on September 6th, in bold, underlined, and all caps, she said, and I quote, "I support the call for a judicial inquiry into the global transportation hub land transactions." She left no room for interpretation, Mr. Speaker. She made it crystal clear that she thinks, as we do on this side of the House, that there needs to be a judicial inquiry into the GTH. Does she still believe what she said back then? Does she still believe that we need a judicial inquiry into the land transactions at the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite has got at least 2 of his caucus members that have been or are members of the Law Society of Saskatchewan. He ought to sit down with those people and have a discussion with them about how things work. That it's inappropriate to comment on things that are under active investigation. It's inappropriate for our government to take a position on something that is before a criminal investigation, something that's being reviewed by the prosecution's office in Manitoba. Mr. Speaker, we're not prepared to have any discussion on what future steps are, and if future steps were taken, they would be put on hold until the investigation was complete. So the members opposite might as well just cool their jets. I'd ask the member opposite to sit down with the people that are in his caucus, that are members of the Law Society, and get some advice from them, Mr. Speaker. The advice that he gets should be that he should just wait patiently, see what happens. We're all waiting patiently on this side of the House, and would encourage him to do the same, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's probably worth noting that this matter was already before the court during the Sask Party leadership race, during which a number of the members opposite, including a member of the Law Society, it's worth pointing out, felt it was a reasonable time to make a big deal about their support for an inquiry into the GTH. And I'm speaking now, of course, about the now Deputy Premier, who had great things to say. The Deputy Premier said, and I quote, "It's unacceptable to me and to the people of Saskatchewan that after all this time, there are still more questions than answers when it comes to the GTH." And I'll quote again, "I believe the only way to lift the cloud over the GTH is to shine a very bright and very public light on the entire matter." Does the Deputy Premier still believe what he said just a few months ago? Does he still support a judicial inquiry into what went down at the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
The member opposite is asking for a very bright light. We agree that we want to resolve this matter, but the bright light would be premature to have done at this point in time. Mr. Speaker, there is a time sequence that must be followed. We are government, Mr. Speaker, and we will ensure that due process is followed, that while things are in investigation by the RCMP, while things are being reviewed by the prosecution, as a government, we will have no comment on those kind of things. And once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to urge the members opposite to give us some support on trying to sell some land at the GTH. Mr. Speaker, well, the members opposite laugh. Maybe it's not important to them. Maybe they don't care about the people that are working there. Maybe those people don't care if that's a success or not. Well, Mr. Speaker, we undertook that project and we want to see it succeed, and we'd like to have some support from them in marketing. We've got 1,800 jobs that were in place at the time of construction, and we have more work to do.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite mentioned perhaps a future bright light that might be shone on this. I think it would be a perfectly apt time to commit to a judicial inquiry in the future. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, it is disappointing when we've canvassed several ministers over there and they couldn't find their feet during question period today to repeat the calls that they made so few months ago. You know, it's becoming abundantly clear that there were serious problems with how Bill Boyd and the GTH bought land, and that taxpayers have lost millions. Millions that could be going towards improving health care, towards fixing our crumbling schools, towards helping the most vulnerable. But instead of calling for an inquiry to get to the bottom of this mess, all of these ministers have turned their backs on the commitments that they made to transparency and accountability. They said one thing when they were running to replace Brad Wall, but now they're doing another. So why won't the Minister of Justice do the right thing, shine that bright light? Why won't he commit to transparency? Why won't he join us in calling for a judicial inquiry into the GTH?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, the process is being conducted right now by the prosecution's unit in the province of Manitoba. They're the ones that are controlling what happens with the light. Those are the ones that are controlling the process that are there. It is not appropriate for this government or the members on this side of the House, as a government, to have anything further to say on this. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, and I think I started before, at the time of construction, 1,800 jobs, $485 million in private investment, nearly $500 million, 860 full-time permanent jobs, 4,800 trucks in and out of the GTH every week. Of the 1,800 acres that are there, 700 acres have already been sold. There are currently 12 clients that are there. Mr. Speaker, this is truly a facility that we should be proud of and want to look forward to make sure that it does everything it can to boost the economy and boost the resources of our province. And in time, Mr. Speaker, it will.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must admit I find myself baffled at times trying to understand exactly what this strategy is over there, where you've got every week a new story revealing more that's going wrong over at the GTH. And the members opposite must be hearing that as they're out in the community. This is a problem that's not going away. And I expect the members opposite are wondering what the strategy is as well. Why the Sask Party doesn't want to get out in front of this, actually bring out that bright light and shine it now to fully understand what's going on. Why wouldn't they want to bring an end to this endless stream of scandalous stories and answer what's going on once and for all? Do they not care what the public thinks? Do they not want the GTH to succeed, or are they afraid of what an inquiry would reveal?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I can't imagine a more damaging strategy than what the members are doing in this House every day, where they criticize the nearly 1,000 people that are working there, 1,000 voters that are working out there, the thousands and thousands of dollars every day that are pumped into the economy, the thousands of trucks every week that go in there. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know what the strategy is from those members up. I'd like to know what their strategy is with regard to pipelines. I'd like to know what their strategy is with regard to carbon tax. I'd like to know what their strategy is with regard to a balanced budget. I'd like to know where some of those members stand on some of those issues, because, Mr. Speaker, their stand isn't very clear on much of anything going forward, and it's high time they did stand up on something. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know what their standard is with what their policy is with regard to debt.
Next question. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our members were happy to take a tour of the site, but now we need a tour of the books. The issues and the lack of accountability at the GTH Run Deep. The GTH has known that a drainage ditch within their footprint has required approval, and an existing drainage ditch has required approval from the Water Security Agency since 2014. And although we've seen approvals from the Water Security Agency move pretty quickly for other projects like the one that Bill Boyd was involved in, Mr. Speaker, this drainage ditch at the GTH is still unapproved. The GTH isn't following the rules, and it's impacting local farmers. So for this drainage ditch, shouldn't the GTH have to abide by the law just like everyone else?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the plan is for the Global Transportation Hub to take ownership of that ditch, but currently it's actually owned by the City of Regina. And so if the members opposite want us to levy fines and charges to the City of Regina, they should maybe stand up and say that. The point, Mr. Speaker, is to bring all of the landowners together, the City of Regina, the RM, the Global Transportation Hub, and the local farmers that have their own drainage ditches that are not approved at this point, all together, hopefully, preferably in a watershed authority, Mr. Speaker, so that the entire network of drainage can be managed in a very responsible way, Mr. Speaker. But I would urge the member that it's not just the City of Regina, it's not just the Global Transportation Hub. There are also local farmers, local landowners, who they themselves are not in compliance with their drainage ditch, Mr. Speaker. Does the member opposite believe we should treat all of them equal, or should we work in collaboration with the entire group to bring them all into compliance at the same time?
Can we tell them what we want?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that land was expropriated by the GTH, and this ditch is impeding the very watershed that the member states that local landowners want. And then, after it was expropriated, taxpayers' money was used to create the drainage ditch within the footprint of the GTH, one of which has been unauthorized for years, just sitting there without being authorized by the WSA. We're talking about an entity highly funded by taxpayers that isn't following the law, Mr. Speaker. Seems to be a pattern. But the Sask Party seems to have no interest in draining the slough at the GTH and coming into compliance with these laws. Why is it okay that the GTH has this drainage ditch without proper authorization?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, this is the City of Regina. The Global Transportation Hub will eventually be the owner of the drainage ditch, but currently it is the City of Regina that owns it. The Global Transportation Hub, the City of Regina, the RM, and the adjacent landowners who have their own unapproved drainage ditches are working together with the Water Security Agency to form an organization to manage all of these drainage projects in the area and to bring them all in compliance. We're working in collaboration with all of these entities, Mr. Speaker, and treating them all the same, because what we intend to do is bring them all in compliance so that there's not one, there's not a few that are out of compliance. While one is in compliance, they're all going to be in compliance, and our hope is that all under one entity to operate that drainage works.
Here, 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 here.
Recognize the member for Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Brad Wall wanted to sell SaskTel, but even the most popular premier in the country was able to eventually figure out that people just didn't want that to happen. But we've heard very little from the new premier or the minister on what their plans are for SaskTel, other than his plan to hire fewer Crown Corporation employees to help balance the books.
Right.
Can the minister tell us, or is he still shopping around SaskTel or looking to sell shares of the company? Or perhaps are there any wind downs in the future for SaskTel? Can the minister inform the House as to what their plans are?
Hear, hear.
Recognize Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, SaskTel is a Crown Corporation in our province, provides valuable services to the citizens in our province. It competes in every aspect of the business that it conducts, whether it be providing security systems, cellular, SaskTel Max, landlines. Every one of the services it provides, there are private sector competition. It provides the province with dividends each and every year, usually in excess of $100 million. Mr. Speaker, you have seen legislation that has been introduced that withdraws largely the position that may be taken on what the definition of privatization is. The reason that was put forward, Mr. Speaker, was to give the citizens of this province comfort that that corporation is not for sale without coming back to the province and making it an election issue or whatever. Mr. Speaker, SaskTel is not on the market.
Recognize the member for Johnny Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it took them a lot of games to be played until they got back around to that very statement, but we agree. SaskTel does tremendous work for the people of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, and it's valued very much by the people of Saskatchewan in return. And I guess what we're looking for is some assurance from the minister in terms of, I think of the new ads that the SaskTel is running where SaskTel highlights how they can improve service and efficiency for small and large businesses in Saskatchewan. We know the good work that SaskTel does in that regard. They've won awards for it, certainly. But we also know that TELUS has been and still is lobbying the Minister for Health and the Minister for Rural and Remote Health on telecommunications files. What role does the Minister see SaskTel playing in the overhaul of the new Provincial Health Authority, or will the government be handing over this valuable work to a private company like TELUS?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a pretty long bow. The so-called lobbying that TELUS has done, Mr. Speaker, is there's some work being done nationally by Infoway, which is under the federal government, Mr. Speaker, to provide possible funding for it's called the CHIP program, Mr. Speaker. It's new technology that can provide health information. It's a health information file, Mr. Speaker. There's been no final decisions made on that, but Mr. Speaker, my understanding is it was an RFP that was done nationally with TELUS, and it was no advocacy for any sales, Mr. Speaker. It's a very long bow.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
I look forward to our conversation in an hour from now, Mr. Speaker, in committee. A lot of uncertainty remains at Pioneer Village, and yesterday, instead of providing answers, the minister still spun lines talking about the 90s yet again. The Canadian Mental Health Association has said that moving these 94 residents could increase anxiety levels and trigger serious problems. This issue shouldn't be taken lightly. Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party government often boasts about their tours of long-term care facilities across the province, but in the 2017 report for Pioneer Village, there wasn't a single mention of infrastructure issues, of asbestos, of mold, or of repairs needed. Wow. Can the minister explain why?
Here. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't spinning any lines. We take this very seriously. We're very concerned for the residents. Officials in Saskatchewan Health Authority have done good work already. I understand that some of the residents have already been placed. Mr. Speaker, to the issue of the residents with mental health concerns, the SHA officials are well aware of that. They're very concerned about that. They're going to do everything possible and appropriate to make sure that any of those residents that require to be moved because their rooms are affected by this, that they'll be moved appropriately and into a proper facility. Mr. Speaker, our officials do a very good job of managing these situations, and I have no reason to believe that'll change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
I didn't hear in that answer any mention of the CO tour reports and why there wasn't anything mentioned at Pioneer Village in 2017, Mr. Speaker. The goal of the CO tour reports is to, quote, find out what's working well, what can be improved, and how the funds have benefited long-term care residents. Well, Mr. Speaker, a clear issue at Pioneer Village is that there hasn't been funds to address this problem, and it's gotten worse and worse as a result of this Sask Party government's inaction. And their reports that are supposed to increase transparency are clearly whitewashed. What is the minister's plan to fix this and ensure proper oversight for long-term care facilities and that seniors are getting the care they need?
Here, here. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what she's referring to with being whitewashed. Mr. Speaker, it's been well known for many years that there are some significant maintenance and capital issues with Regina Pioneer Village. I mentioned yesterday We inherited that facility from the city in 2009. It was known at that time. Mr. Speaker, since then, we've spent over $12 million to remediate the facility, to make repairs, to mitigate any of the potential problems, Mr. Speaker. But it's still a huge, huge problem. We've never hid that. It's been well known. It's been documented. There's been news stories over a number of years. I've asked ministry officials and SHA officials, Mr. Speaker, to, in light of the most recent situation, to make recommendations to us. That'll be coming up probably this summer, Mr. Speaker. We'll make some decisions moving forward. And back to the previous question, I should also mention, Mr. Speaker, mental health therapists are also working and are available to the families and the residences that are affected by this with mental health issues. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
In January, this government assured the Saskatchewan construction industry that they would work to ensure a successful year. But there has continued to be a decrease in construction, leaving Saskatchewan lagging behind most other provinces in this country. And there's been no real leadership or plan revealed to halt this decline. Investment in new housing is down 15% since last year, a loss of more than $12.5 million. This decrease is related to demand, Mr. Speaker, as more and more people are leaving the province looking for work. While other provinces continue to grow, what steps will this government take to keep people in the province and to create stability for the construction industry?
Recognize the Minister of Trade.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are very proud of our record on the economy. And this, I would point to a couple of stats, Mr. Speaker, some facts. Over the past decade, from 2008 to 2017, there have been an average of almost 6,500 new housing starts annually. This compares to the last 10 years of the NDP government, Mr. Speaker, when there were 3,400 housing starts annually, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, significantly more in the last decade of growth under this party. In March 2018, the value of building permits, these are recent statistics, Mr. Speaker, in Saskatchewan, increased by 22% from February 2018, which is second in growth amongst all of the provinces. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell you and I can tell this House how if you want to have a plan to decrease the number of housing starts, to decrease the amount of building permits in this province, how would you do that, Mr. Speaker? A carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. The only economic policy advocated by the members opposite, the only policy that we have heard from them on the economy is a massive new tax. The Leader of the Opposition wants to wave the white flag. He wants to surrender to Justin Trudeau. He wants to impose a carbon tax in this province. We won't let it happen.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Still no mention of a plan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has a responsibility to let the people of Saskatchewan know the state of the economy. Yet they have not addressed the decline in jobs, nor have they mentioned the decline in housing builds reported this month. Both have a negative impact on our economic growth, Mr. Speaker. With fewer and fewer jobs in Saskatchewan and less demand for newly constructed homes, this government continues to paint their economic sense as sound, but that is not reflected in these numbers. Mr. Speaker, why has the government ignored these numbers, and do they have a plan to support recovery?
Recognize the Minister of Trade.
Mr. Speaker, the economic record of this government is one of the most significantly positive in the history of this province, Mr. Speaker. We've seen job growth unparalleled in the course of the last 10 years compared to other previous periods of history. We've seen population growth that has not been seen in this province in nearly 80 years, Mr. Speaker. We've also seen a plan from the NDP. We've seen a plan from the Leader of the Opposition, and we're going to have a very clear choice in the next election, Mr. Speaker. A Leader of the Opposition that wants to surrender to Justin Trudeau, that wants to impose a massive new carbon tax on the people of this province versus a strong Premier who will stand up and fight for the people of this province every day of the week. A Leader of the Opposition on that side who wants to spend $2.5 billion, Mr. Speaker, on all manner of things in addition to saying he wants to see a balanced budget. Mr. Speaker, that's not going to happen with $2.5 billion in new spending, Mr. Speaker. A very clear choice, a weak position from the Leader of the Opposition, a strong position from this Premier and this government. I think I know what the people are going to pick.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill number 125, the Saskatchewan Value Added Agriculture Incentive Act, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read a third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 125. Order. This is kind of an important work, it's bills. I'm not sure. Let's actually pay attention. I recognize actually it's me. The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 125 and that the bill and its amendments be now read a third time. Is leave granted? Right, when shall the amendments be read a first time? Oh, sorry. Without amendment. You got it. The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 125 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pleasure the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Economy.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on the Economy to report Bill number 126, the Energy Export Act, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered Committee of the Whole on Bills? Recognize the Minister.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill and that the bill be now read a third time.
Minister has requested leave to waive consideration Committee of the Whole on Bill number 126 and that the bill be now read a third time. Is leave granted? The Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 126 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pleasure the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am instructed by the Standing Committee on Human Services to report Bill number 89, the School Choice Protection Act, a bilingual bill with amendment.
When shall this bill be considered Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, Mr. Speaker, and that the bill and its amendments be now read the third time.
Minister has requested leave to waive consideration Committee of the Whole on Bill number 89 and that the bill and its amendments be now read a third time. Is leave granted? When shall the amendments be read a first time?
Mr. Speaker, I
recognize the Minister.
I move that the amendments be now read a first and second time.
Been moved by the Minister that the amendments be now read a first and second time. It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First and second reading of the amendments. Second.
Minister may proceed to move third reading.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill now be read a third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 89 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Assembly ready for the question? It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that the committees may continue their good work, I move that this House do now adjourn.
So moved by the Government's House Leader that the Assembly be now adjourned. Is it a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. This House now stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
you